Have you noticed that immigration is becoming one of the biggest political issues across Europe? Over the past few years, elections in countries after country have, been influenced by debates about migrants, asylum seekers, border security, and deportations. Now, the European Parliament has approved one of the toughest immigration reforms in decades, and it's already generating strong reactions across the continent. Supporters say it is necessary to restore control over immigration. Critics argue it could, weaken protection for vulnerable migrants and asylum seekers. In this video, we'll break down what actually happened, whether they claim that the people protested and petitioned their government is accurate, what the new law says, and most importantly, what it means for Nigerians and other immigrants living in Europe. Let's get into it. The first thing to understand is that the European Parliament recently approved what is known as the Return Regulation. The legislation passed with 418 votes in favor and 218 against. The main goal of the law is to make it easier and faster for European countries to remove people who do not have a legal right to remain in the European Union. According to EU officials, many deportation orders issued across Europe are never actually carried out. The new rules are designed to change that by creating a more unified system for handling removals and returns. One of the most controversial parts of the law is the creation of what are called return hubs. These are facilities that can be located outside the European Union. Under the new rules, some migrants who have received final deportation orders could be transferred to this center while arrangements are made for their return to their countries of origin. Supporters argue that return hubs will make deportation system more effective. Critics argue that they raise serious legal and human rights concerns. That disagreement is one reason why the vote has become so controversial. Now let's address the statement that this happened because the people protested and petitioned their governments. The reality is more complicated. There has indeed been growing public pressure in several European countries for governments to reduce irregular migration and tighten border controls. Immigration has become a major election issue in countries such as Italy, the Netherlands, Australia, Sweden, Germany, and others. Anti-immigration parties have gained support in many recent elections, pushing mainstream politicians to adopt tougher positions. However, it will not be accurate to say that a single protest movement or petition directly caused the law to pass yesterday. Instead, this law is the result of years of political debates, negotiations, elections, and changing public attitude towards migration across Europe. Another reason this story has gone viral is because of what happened immediately after the votes. Following the approval of the legislation, some right-wing lawmakers, reportedly celebrated by chanting, "Send them back." The chant sparked outrage among opponents of the law, who accused supporters of using language that dehumanizes migrants. Other lawmakers responded with chants of "Shame on you." That moment captured just how divided Europe has become on immigration. For some Europeans, stronger deportation policies represent common sense border control. For others, they represent a dangerous shift towards harsher treatment of migrants and asylum seekers. The debate is far from over. Now let's talk about what this means for immigrants. First, not all immigrants are affected equally. A very important distinction must be made between legal immigrants and people who are staying in a country without legal authorization. Many headlines create the impression that all immigrants are being targeted. That is not what the law says. The primary focus is on individuals who have exhausted their asylum claims, overstayed visas, or otherwise no longer have the legal right to remain in an EU country. If someone is legally working, studying or residing in Europe under a valid immigration status, this law generally does not apply to them. However, even legal immigrants may feel indirect effects. Why? Because stricter migration policies often lead to increased scrutiny of immigration system overall. Governments may conduct more compliance check, tighten visa rules, or introduce tougher enforcement measures. This creates a climate where immigration becomes a more sensitive political issue. Now let's discuss Nigerians specifically. Nigerians remains one of Africa's largest sources of international migrants. Thousands of Nigerians live, study and work across Europe. Many have built successful careers and contribute significantly to their host countries. For Nigerians who are legally residents, the most important lesson is simple: maintain legal status, obey immigration rules, and ensure documents remain valid. The individuals most vulnerable under these new policies are those who have unresolved immigration issues, failed asylum claims, expired permits or outstanding deportation orders. But this story goes beyond Nigerians. It affects immigrations from Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, and many other regions. The law applies broadly to non-EU nationals who do not have authorization to remain in the European Union. One of the biggest questions being asked is whether Europe is becoming less welcoming to immigrants. The answer depends on how you define immigration. Europe still faces labor shortage in several sectors. Many countries continue to recruit skilled workers, healthcare professionals, engineers, IT specialists, and other workers from abroad. Legal migration pathways continue to exist. At the same time, governments are becoming increasingly, determined to reduce irregular migration. In other words, Europe is not necessarily closing the door to all immigration. Instead, many policymakers are trying to separate legal migration from irregular migration and enforce the distinction more aggressively. Whether the strategy succeeds remains to be seen. Another interesting aspect of the debate is that not all European leaders agree. For example, French President Emmanuel Macron recently expressed opposition to the idea of offshore return hubs, arguing that they may not be effective and may not align with European values. Spanish leaders have also expressed concerns. This shows that despite the parliament vote, disagreements remain inside Europe itself. Implementation will likely vary from country to country. Human rights organizations have also raised concerns. Groups such as Amnesty International argue that expanded detention power and return hubs could lead to abuses and weaken protections for migrants. Supporters of legislation reject this claim and argue that the system includes safeguards and is necessary to maintaining public confidence in immigration policies. So where does this leave us? The biggest takeaway is that Europe is entering a new phase of migration policy. The political mood has changed. Governments are under pressure from voters who want stronger border controls. At the same time, businesses still need workers, universities still need international students, and many economies still depend on legal migration. This means immigration will remain one of the most important and controversial topics in Europe. for years to come. For immigrants, the message is clear: legal status matters more than ever. Keeping immigration documents up to date, following visa conditions and understanding local laws are becoming increasingly important in an environment where enforcement is expanding. And for countries such as Nigeria, this development is also a reminder that migration policies can change quickly. Anyone planning to relocate abroad should focus on legal pathways and stay informed about changing immigration rules. The era of stricter enforcement is no longer a future possibility. In many parts of Europe, it is already happening, and the approval of this new EU return regulation may become one of the defining migration policy moments of this decade. Thanks for watching. If you find this information helpful, kindly like, share and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.